Darren Tran heard the producer before he saw her because her voice carried across the marble like she had mistaken the plaza for a studio floor. He had just finished his turn at the south end of the mat, rifle settled against his shoulder, chin level, eyes fixed ahead, when a cluster of people pressed past the visitor line with a camera already live and a boom pole swinging too high over the crowd. Their movement cut across the cadence he had held for the last 21 steps, and in the space between one heel strike and the next, he measured distance, angle, and intent. Kendra Voss pointed toward the mat with 2 fingers, urgent, impatient, accustomed to compliance. Mila Grant stayed on her left with a shoulder rig, lens pointed toward the tomb, red recording light visible. 3 more crew members fanned behind them, 5 total, each carrying gear that was not permitted for commercial filming on that ground. A school group near the rope line shifted backward as the camera operator stepped into their space, and one boy nearly lost his footing on the stone lip that edged the walkway. Darren completed the step he had committed to before they broke the boundary. He stopped on the exact mark, turned with the same precision he would have used in an empty plaza, and faced them fully. His expression did not change. Nothing in his posture announced urgency. Only his eyes moved, tracking each hand, each cable, each path toward the mat. Kendra kept walking as if the line in front of her was decorative, and the person in uniform existed for her footage. The crowd went quiet in pieces. First the veterans nearest the front, next the families who had learned this silence from years of military funerals, and last the tourists who sensed a shift before they understood it. Mila lifted the lens higher, trying to clear heads, and took one more step toward the black mat. Darren opened his mouth once and spoke one word that struck the stone harder than shouted argument ever could. "Back!" Mila froze. Kendra stopped half a stride later, breath caught, one hand still up like she could direct traffic by force of habit. The boom operator lowered his pole without being told. A child in the school group stared at Darren as if he had never heard a single syllable carry that much authority, and Miss Halpern bent to whisper that the tomb honored service members buried without names, so respect was owed in full. Darren held his ground and said nothing else, because nothing else was required. Within seconds, Arlington security moved from both sides of the plaza, and SFC Mateo Ruiz stepped into view from the relief corridor, already assessing the same geometry Darren had read. Kendra tried to recover control by turning to Ruiz instead of Darren, as if rank could be negotiated through volume. "We are with the network. We have rights in public spaces." Ruiz did not raise his voice. He identified the boundary breach, the active disruption of ceremony, and the prior denial logged through public affairs. He directed the crew to power down and move out under escort. Mila kept the camera up for 3 seconds too long, and the nearest officer stated that continued recording would be logged in the incident file as evidence of noncompliance. One security officer looked directly at her and repeated the order, and she lowered it, face draining as recognition caught up to ambition. Darren watched the removal without turning his head. His task in that moment was narrower than everyone else's. He held the post, waited for the lane to clear, and listened for the sound that mattered most. Not argument, not radio traffic, only the return of respectful silence. When it came, thin at first and steady a breath later, he resumed his walk. 21 steps, pause, turn, 21 steps back, the pattern folding over the disruption until the plaza looked whole again. 2 hours earlier, the plaza had carried a different kind of noise. Morning shoes on gravel, quiet conversations from families arriving early, and the rustle of printed maps unfolding under the oaks. Arlington in spring held color at the edges while the tomb held none. White stone against a pale sky, exact lines, no ornament wasted. Darren had reported before first light, uniform inspection complete, brass correct, seams clean, gloves bright enough to catch any stray mark before anyone else could see it. He knew every visible element of what he wore, not as decoration, as commitment. The dark sunglasses sat level, the belt buckle centered perfectly. The brass on his jacket reflected a thin ribbon of sky. The creases in his trousers held like drawn lines. His shoes, mirror-polished, returned the stone under him in distorted reflections that moved only when he moved. Visitors often saw elegance first. What they were looking at was labor repeated, until no part of the body was accidental. Xavier Lee met him near the public affairs side entrance with a folder tucked under one arm and a radio clipped high on his chest. Xavier wore no ceremonial uniform, only Arlington operations attire, and the expression of someone who had read one difficult email thread too many before breakfast. He waited until Darren cleared routine check-in and spoke in a low voice, concise, factual, no flourish. A commercial request had been denied 3 days earlier. Network-branded reality segment. Producer listed as Kendra Voss. Reason for denial clearly documented. Darren did not ask why. He already knew. Arlington permitted public access widely, but commercial filming required approval and coordination, and this request had sought staged interactions near active ceremonial space. Xavier added one detail that sharpened everything. Kendra had pushed back after the denial, arguing that a small crew could shoot as regular visitors if they stayed mobile. Xavier had replied in writing that production activity remained barred regardless of ticketed access status, and he had flagged operations in case someone tested the line. That warning resolved one uncertainty before the day even opened. If Kendra appeared with equipment, confusion would not explain her presence. Darren logged the information, thanked Xavier with a single nod, and moved to pre-ceremony preparation. He checked his rifle, reviewed relief timing, and stepped into the ritual that made the rest of the world smaller for a while. Once on the mat, he did not improvise. He walked 21 steps, paused, turned, paused again, and walked 21 back, each movement deliberate enough to be read from the far rail. By mid-morning, the crowd settled into the familiar Arlington mix. A pair of veterans stood near the front with hats held against their chests, speaking only when necessary. 2 Gold Star families stayed together just behind them, one older woman clutching a folded program with both hands. Tourists filled the outer rows, phones mostly down once the cadence began. A school group arrived in matching shirts, 20-something students and one teacher carrying a clipboard, trying to keep them quiet without flattening their curiosity. From the mat, Darren tracked everything in arcs. He noticed who leaned over the rope, who shifted bags from shoulder to shoulder, who kept stepping backward without looking. He marked exits and sight lines the way he had learned years earlier in places where mistakes cost more than embarrassment. Then the plaza looked calm, and it was calm, yet calm never meant unmonitored. His stillness only existed because his attention moved constantly, gathering details and discarding them, preserving the few that might matter in 10 seconds. 8 minutes before the breach, one detail stopped fitting. A woman at the outer edge lifted a headset from her neck and touched her earpiece while scanning the plaza in short, practiced cuts, not like a tourist searching for a view, like crew counting marks before a take. Darren saw a man near her roll a hard case behind his leg to keep it low. Another adjusted a compact LED panel inside a backpack. None of that equipment belonged in casual sightseeing. He saw Xavier at the crowd edge a minute later, chin angled down toward his radio, eyes locked on the same cluster. Their glances did not meet, and they did not need to. Darren kept his cadence unchanged. Xavier moved 3 paces to his right, creating a cleaner lane for security if the group advanced. That repositioning solved an obstacle before it formed. If someone rushed the line, response time would be seconds, not half a minute, and ceremony could hold without visible scramble. Kendra arrived into that tension like she was entering her own set. She wore dark glasses, network badge clipped to her jacket, despite knowing credentials held no authority there. Her confidence came from a habit that had worked in other places: show up with cameras rolling, force staff to choose between confrontation and bad press, bank on hesitation. She gave Mila a quick signal with 2 fingers, and Mila lifted the rig. The 3 other crew members spread out with practiced efficiency, 5 people forming a moving wedge through the visitors. Darren finished his 21 and turned. Kendra started directing in a low stage whisper that carried farther than she intended. Get the walk. Get the audience reaction. Stay tight on him. A tourist stepped aside, uncertain whether to object. One veteran did object, voice clipped, telling them they were out of line. Kendra did not look at him. Her attention stayed on the frame she wanted, and that refusal to acknowledge anyone outside her objective made the next decision unavoidable for everyone around her. At the far end of the rail, the schoolteacher, Ms. Halpern, placed one arm across the front of her students and guided them back a pace. She had brought them for a civics trip. For history, they could stand inside, and now she watched an adult model the exact opposite of respect in a place built to demand it. 2 boys whispered to each other, confused by the camera team and the sudden tension. Ms. Halpern told them quietly to watch the guards' feet and keep silent. Kendra crossed from aggressive to willful when she stepped over the visitor boundary and motioned Mila toward the mat. Arlington had not left that line ambiguous. The rope, the spacing, the signage, and the behavior of everyone else marked it clearly. Mila hesitated for half a second, long enough to show she understood where she stood, then followed anyway. The 3 crew members behind them advanced in short pushes, trying to keep gear from snagging on bystanders. Intent was no longer debatable. Darren registered their feet crossing before the crowd fully reacted. He completed the step in progress, planted, turned, and faced them. His breathing stayed even. Inside, calculations accelerated. Distances updated. 1 child too near the edge. 1 cable loop could catch a boot. 1 producer fixated on outcome. 1 camera operator already reconsidering. He had seen that look in people before, the instant where momentum met a boundary stronger than ego. If he overreacted, he would feed spectacle. If he underreacted, he would permit violation. He chose minimum necessary force, verbal, sharp, immediate, exactly what protocol allowed in that context. He spoke 1 word. Back. No extra instruction, no lecture, no raised theatrics, only a command shaped by training and by the knowledge that this ground belonged first to men whose names had been lost long before any network logo existed. The sound stopped movement at once because it carried certainty, and certainty removed space for argument in the bodies hearing it. Kendra reacted first with disbelief, mouth opening to challenge, hand lifting as if to swat away interruption. Mila reacted with something closer to fear, not of harm, of consequence. She lowered her center of gravity without realizing it, a physical retreat before her feet moved. The boom operator stepped backward on his own and almost clipped a tourist, then apologized under his breath. The veterans at the rail held their positions, faces hard, watching whether officials would back the command or dilute it. Security entered from both flanks, fast and controlled. No grabbing, no shouting. Xavier was with them, not leading enforcement, supporting process, identifying individuals, confirming the prior denial attached to Kendra's name. SFC Mateo Ruiz arrived seconds later from the relief corridor, Presence measured, posture straight, eyes moving from the crew to Darren to the crowd and back. Verifying sequence before speaking. He addressed Kendra directly, stating she was engaged in unauthorized commercial activity after formal denial and had breached boundary during active ceremony. Kendra attempted the argument she had saved for this exact moment. She cited network affiliation, public access rights, and the claim that no one had physically blocked her path until now. Ruiz answered each point without heat. Public access remained open to visitors, he said, and production operations remained prohibited under denied request. Boundary breach during ceremony triggered immediate corrective authority. He ordered the crew to exit the area under escort and to surrender, identifying information for incident documentation. No part of his tone invited negotiation. Mila glanced at Kendra before complying, searching for permission to accept reality. Kendra gave none. She told Mila to keep recording, voice low but audible in the front rows. That decision resolved another question. This was not confusion under stress. This was deliberate continuation after direct order. A security officer repeated the command to power down. Mila hesitated, swallowed, and clicked the rig off, then held it against her chest with both arms, like she was trying to make it smaller. While the crew was being turned out, Darren remained motionless at post, eyes forward, profile cut against white stone. From where tourists stood, he looked untouched by the disruption. Inside, memory pressed hard against discipline, because the word unknown had never been abstract for him. Not since 2018 in Nangarhar, when he and SPC Owen Pike were part of a blast recovery mission that began with radio static and ended in dust thick enough to hide what no one wanted to admit. Owen had been 19. Darren had enlisted in 2012. Young, lean, convinced hard work could answer any fear if he stacked enough of it in front of himself. The Army taught him systems first, then responsibility, then the cost of getting any detail wrong. By the time he deployed, he had learned to map uncertainty quickly, read people under stress, and move in ways that reduced risk for everyone near him. None of that prepared him for recovery work after a blast, where precision met grief in ground-level fragments and missing names. On that 2018 mission, the team secured the site, marked remains, checked and rechecked the crater edge. They accounted for equipment and personnel twice. They found enough to bring some men home with certainty. They did not recover all of Owen Pike. The report used careful language, partial remains, unresolved elements, continuing search. Darren remembered less of the paperwork than the silence that followed, the quiet around the table, when they packed what they had and acknowledged what they did not. Months later, back stateside, he attended a service where Owen's mother stood straight through every word, as if bending might break something she needed to keep intact. Darren shook her hand and failed to answer the question in her eyes, not because he refused honesty, because honesty had no shape that could offer comfort. He carried that failure longer than he carried any gear. Unknown stopped being a concept that day. It became a category of grief with one face he could never stop seeing. When he earned assignment to the Tomb Guard platoon in 2022, he did not treat it as career polish. He treated it as a place where precision could serve people who no longer had names attached to their sacrifice. People like Owen in the only way the living could manage: consistency, respect, and refusal to let convenience touch sacred ground. Every inspection, every measured step, every corrected seam carried that private equation. Duty became the form his grief could hold without spilling onto strangers. That private equation was running in him while Kendra argued with Ruiz 10 yards away. He heard fragments. Public property. Editorial writes, "We already have footage," and each phrase landed against marble that had outlived harder noise. The crowd listened, divided at first by knowledge. Tourists looked from badges to uniforms, trying to decode who held authority. Veterans had already decided. Gold Star family members had already decided. The school group watched Ms. Halpern, waiting for cues on how to read what was unfolding. Ruiz resolved the institutional question in one clean sequence. He requested Kendra's identification, confirmed her name against the denied request, directed security to escort all 5 crew members off ceremonial grounds for the day, and documented that Mila's continued recording after command would be attached as evidence in the access review. He did not ask Darren to justify the verbal command because justification was built into protocol and visible facts. Boundary crossed, active ceremony, corrective order issued, compliance delayed, enforcement applied. Process protected everyone in that order. Xavier stayed at the edge of the interaction, taking notes, recording times, and keeping his voice low when he relayed updates. He had seen Kendra's pushback in email, which was why operations had a legal response ready, instead of improvising on marble with a crowd watching. That preparation resolved a hesitation that often weakens public incidents. Staff did not need to wonder whether to act. The denial was clear, the boundary was clear, and the remedy was clear. Clarity turned potential chaos into a short event. Mila became the first from the crew to visibly understand the line she had crossed. As security guided them out, she looked back once toward the tomb, then toward the students who had watched her follow Kendra over the boundary. Shame moved across her face, faster than the words could keep up. At the outer walkway, she asked, voice barely above a whisper, where she should give a statement. A security officer directed her to the designated area near visitor services. She nodded and kept walking. Kendra kept resisting until the last possible yard, speaking to Ruiz, to Xavier, to anyone with a radio, trying to convert conflict into leverage. Nothing in their responses rose to meet her intensity. The absence of escalation denied her the scene she expected. By the time they reached the gate, her posture changed from confrontational to procedural. Shoulders tight, jaw set, voice lower as she provided identification details she had hoped to avoid sharing. Institutional pressure had not broken decorum. Decorum had absorbed institutional pressure. On the plaza, the moral jury finished deliberating in silence. A veteran near the rail exhaled slowly and replaced his cap. One Gold Star father closed his eyes for a second and reopened them on Darren, not smiling, simply steady. Tourists who had been filming lowered their phones. Ms. Halpern crouched to eye level with her students and spoke quietly enough that only those nearest heard, telling them this place honored service members who could not be named, and respect here was not optional courtesy. It was a debt. One student asked why the guard used only one word. Ms. Halpern answered that one word was enough when rules were clear and duty was clear. Another student asked if the guard was angry. She watched Darren resume position and said anger was not what they were seeing. They were seeing control. That explanation settled the children more effectively than a reprimand could have. They stood straighter, voices down, eyes on the mat, learning civic order from a moment no lesson plan had predicted. SFC Ruiz walked to Darren's sector line once the lane was fully clear and delivered a brief confirmation in a tone meant for the post, not the audience. Incident handled. Ceremony space clear. Continue. Darren acknowledged with a precise nod at the proper beat. No handshake, no display, no interruption of the role each man held. Ruiz stepped away and returned to relief duties. The chain of authority closed itself cleanly. visible to those who understood it, almost invisible to those who did not. The plaza waited for Darren's next move. He began with his left foot, heel striking the mat in exact rhythm. 21 steps carried him north, measured and even, rifle settled, shoulders square. He paused at the end, executed the turn, paused again, and walked 21 back. That repetition did more than restart ceremony. It restored the moral geometry that had been bent by intrusion, reminding everyone present that no individual ego, no network timetable, no claim of access outranked the dead, honored on that stone. As he walked, Darren felt his pulse settle toward baseline. Adrenaline receded in controlled increments, leaving focus sharper rather than drained. He tracked the crowd once more, confirming the crew was gone, the students contained, the rail clear. He noted Xavier at the edge, now still, notebook closed, watching the ceremony rather than the disruption. He marked Ruiz in peripheral view near relief corridor, posture relaxed but attentive. The incident had ended because each person who needed to do their part had done exactly that. At visitor services, Mila gave her statement first. She confirmed she had knowledge of the denied request and admitted she kept recording after the command to stop, and staff tagged that clip to the incident packet used in the access restriction review. That admission mattered, not for punishment theater, for accurate documentation and enforceable future limits on production access. Kendra gave her statement next, contesting language, challenging terms, attempting to narrow what had happened to misunderstanding. The available footage and witness accounts made that claim fragile. Arlington staff logged both statements and forwarded them through proper channels without commentary. Xavier completed his own report by early afternoon. He included initial denial correspondence, timeline of crew entry, boundary crossing, command issued, and removal sequence. He attached notes on crowd composition because context affected response. Veterans and families recognized violation quickly. Tourists lagged. School group required immediate educational framing to prevent panic. Administrative writing rarely felt emotional to him, yet this one carried weight. A clean record protected the institution and protected Darren from becoming a headline detached from facts. The rest of the day moved forward under ordinary Arlington rules. Visitors arrived, listened, asked quiet questions, left with smaller voices than they arrived with. News of the disruption spread in whispers through the grounds, edited by whoever repeated it. Some versions exaggerated confrontation. Anyone who had stood on the plaza knew better. The defining image was not conflict. It was a single word spoken at the precise threshold where sacred space required defense, followed by disciplined enforcement and immediate return to ceremony. Late in his shift, Darren saw Ms. Halpern leading her students toward the exit path. One boy turned back for a last look at the mat and mimicked the 21 count under his breath while walking. Ms. Halpern noticed and nodded without interrupting him. She had come to teach history from monuments and dates. Her class left, having seen protocol, consequence, and respect enacted in real time by adults who did not perform for applause. Darren registered that and returned his eyes forward. He thought of Owen again during a pause at the line, not as a dramatic intrusion, as a familiar presence at the edge of duty. Owen would have laughed at how polished the shoes were, would have made some comment about inspection standards and city stone. Darren let the memory pass through without clinging. The work in front of him needed both hands in the present. Grief had its place, and his place gave grief structure. 21 steps north, turn, 21 south. As evening approached, the crowd thinned. Veterans lingered longest, often waiting for one final cycle before leaving. A Gold Star mother in a blue scarf stood near the rail with her daughter, neither speaking, both watching the cadence until dusk softened edges of stone and uniform alike. Darren held the same precision. In lower light he had held at noon. Ceremony did not dilute with fatigue. If anything, late hours demanded deeper discipline because the body wanted shortcuts and duty allowed none. After relief, Darren moved through post-shift routine in measured sequence, weapon handoff, uniform check, brief administrative debrief. Ruiz asked for factual confirmation only, no embellishment, no emotional excavation. Darren answered with times, positions, and command details. One-word command count. 1, as logged. Crew size 5. Incident year 2024. Denied request status confirmed through public affairs before event. The report closed with the same conclusion the plaza had already witnessed. Minimum required intervention. Ceremony continuity maintained. No injuries. No physical contact by the guard. Xavier met him outside after paperwork, holding 2 paper cups of coffee gone lukewarm in the evening air. They stood for a minute under a tree line where visitors rarely walked that late. Xavier said he had expected pressure from the network once denial went out, just not a breach during active ceremony. Darren said little. He did not need to narrate what happened from his perspective because the facts already carried it. Xavier nodded, understanding the boundary between debrief and confession. That night, clips from tourists surfaced online, short, shaky, incomplete, each starting too late or ending too soon. Some showed Kendra pushing forward. Some captured the command. None captured what mattered most inside Darren's body when he chose that one word and no more. Public discourse flared briefly, as it does, with people who had not been there attempting certainty. Arlington did not answer social media with argument. It answered the way it always had, with a documented process and uninterrupted ceremony the next morning. By sunrise the following day, Darren was back in preparation, uniform precise, mind clear, routine unchanged. The tomb did not require novelty. It required constancy. Visitors who had heard about the incident arrived with extra attention, scanning for drama that never came. They received something better. Exact steps, exact pauses, exact respect, repeated without regard for yesterday's noise. In that repetition, people found what headlines could not provide, evidence that institutions can hold their line without spectacle when people inside them trust protocol. Mid-morning brought a different school group, younger this time, and one teacher asked a ranger whether it was true someone had tried to film a show there. The ranger confirmed an unauthorized attempt had been addressed and ceremony had continued. He kept the explanation short and pointed the class toward posted guidelines and historical context. Story did not become rumor because process had written it down. Darren passed in front of them at the next turn, and even the younger students fell quiet at the sound of his steps. In the days that followed, Arlington completed access review for Kendra's production team, based on incident documentation, statements, and footage evidence. Public affairs maintained the same line it had held from the start. Requests were reviewed through formal channels. Denial remained denial. Visitor status could not be used as a disguise for unauthorized commercial activity. Xavier sent final correspondence with language cleared by operations and legal staff. It lacked drama, and that was the point. Institutions do serious work in plain sentences. Mila sent a follow-up note through the statement process, acknowledging she had crossed the boundary after seeing it and had kept filming after direct order. She wrote that she had not understood the place when she arrived and understood it differently when she left. The note did not erase the breach. It did mark recognition, which mattered in quieter ways that never trend online. Xavier filed it with the case materials. Darren never read it. His lane remained narrower by design. Weeks later, Ms. Halpern assigned her students a reflection on civic spaces and behavioral limits. Several wrote about the one word they had heard and how quickly a crowd changed when context clicked into place. One student wrote that he used to think rules at monuments were mostly for appearances, and now he thought some rules existed to protect people who could not speak for themselves anymore. She mailed copies of selected reflections to Arlington Educational Outreach. Xavier forwarded one to operations with names redacted. Darren learned about the reflections only indirectly when Ruiz mentioned that Outreach had shared feedback from a recent class visit. Ruiz did not quote details. He simply said the students learned what they needed to learn. Darren acknowledged and returned to kit maintenance. External praise sat outside his operating frame. The work asked for repetition, not recognition. He checked stitching, polished leather, inspected brass, and prepared for another shift where no incident would occur if everyone respected the same line. One afternoon, months after the breach, he saw a visitor stop another visitor from stepping too close to the boundary, doing it quietly, with a hand gesture and a whisper rather than a public reprimand. That tiny correction carried the same logic as the larger event. Community reinforcing norms before enforcement became necessary. Darren logged it and kept his cadence. Institutions are strongest when formal authority and civilian understanding meet in the middle, each doing their part without demanding credit. His memory of 2018 did not fade, and he did not expect it to. Owen Pike remained present in private moments, especially near dusk when the plaza emptied, and the white stone held light longer than the walkways around it. Darren had stopped asking memory to leave. He asked only that it stay in its lane while he worked. At the tomb, that lane had shape. 21 steps in one direction, turn, 21 back, repeated until grief became service and service became visible to strangers. The day Kendra crossed the boundary did not become legend on sight. It became a case file, a teaching point, and a reminder that confidence untethered from respect can misread stillness as weakness. Darren's stillness had never been weakness. It was active control built from years, from enlistment in 2012, from loss in 2018, from assignment in 2022, from every inspection and every rehearsal that trained response down to its necessary minimum. One word had been enough because one word met the exact need. Near the end of one late shift, a veteran in the crowd removed his cap as Darren passed and whispered something his grandson could barely hear. The boy asked him to repeat it. The veteran leaned down and said, "He is walking for someone's son." Darren did not hear those exact words from the mat. He saw the grandfather's posture, the boy's face, and the cap held against the old man's chest, and he understood the exchange without receiving its language. Arlington settled again into what it had always been, a place where the living arrive carrying their own timelines and leave, if they are paying attention, with a clearer sense that some debts cannot be repaid in full and still must be honored daily. Darren's role inside that system remained narrow and exact. He did not curate emotion for the crowd. He held a line. He kept cadence. He applied only the authority required when a line was crossed, and he returned immediately to duty when order was restored. On the anniversary month of Owen's death, Darren stood post under a high, pale sky, while a light wind moved flags in the distance. Memory arrived as it always did, unscheduled and specific. Dust, radio static, a missing answer at roll call. He said it where he always said it, beneath the discipline that kept him useful in the present. The tomb did not ask him to forget. It asked him to be precise. Precision gave grief a task, and task kept grief from becoming noise. At noon that day, the plaza filled with a crowd that looked like every crowd before it. Veterans, families, tourists, students, each carrying different knowledge into the same silence. Darren completed one leg of the walk, 21 steps, paused, turned, and came back 21, the rhythm steady enough to teach anyone watching how order feels when it is earned and maintained. No producer crossed the line. No command was needed. Respect held on its own, which was always the preferred outcome. When disruption did come, as it sometimes would in any public place, the response would stay the same, minimal and exact, never theatrical, never personal, calibrated to the violation, and anchored in protocol. That was the promise built into the uniform Darren wore, and the post he kept. Visitors rarely heard the promise spoken aloud, yet they could see it each time he moved with no wasted motion, and each time he refused to move faster than discipline allowed. As evening settled on the day this story ended, the crowd thinned to a final ring of quiet faces. Xavier stood near the edge again, off to one side, no clipboard this time, simply watching the ceremony resume and continue as if no disruption had ever tried to bend it. Ruiz checked the perimeter and moved on. The students were long gone. Kendra and her crew were gone. Mila's statement sat in a file. The plaza held only what belonged there. Darren reached the north mark, paused, turned, paused again, and walked back. The sound of his shoes on the mat carried cleanly across stone and into the listening space the crowd kept for him. He did not look toward them. He did not need acknowledgement. 21 steps remained what they had always been, a measured answer to loss without names, a public act shaped by private memory, repeated until silence returned and stayed. The sacred order had been restored, and he kept it restored by walking.